Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. It's just gone 2 o'clock, so I'm going to resume the hearing sessions into the examination of the South Tyneside local plan. Can I just check, can everybody hear me okay? Yep, good. Just to remind everybody, my name is David Spencer. I'm the planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out the independent examination of the submitted South Tyneside local plan. This was the plan that was submitted last March, and my examination process is informed by representations that people made on the proposed plan going back to January-March 2024. So all of those representations that you originally made now 2 years ago are before me, and I'm having regard to those. I appreciate people have then provided further statements in response to my matters, issues and questions. Can I please ask that people ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please? And can I, at this point, just have the council just remind or advise us in terms of just the general housekeeping, whether we do a fire test this afternoon?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if there is an alarm, could you please make your way to the nearest fire exit, which is that side of the room, and then to the far side of the hotel car park. Regarding toilet provision, the toilets are in the corridor at the bottom end of the corridor on the right. Could everyone please note there are cables taped to the floor around the room, so please be careful when moving round. And then finally, if you have a car in the hotel car park, could you please ensure that you've entered your registration number in the devices at the hotel reception? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, these sessions are being recorded, so for those who are unable to attend, there will be recordings made. They are uploaded onto the council's website shortly after these sessions take place. But can I just clarify at this stage, does anybody else wish to make their own separate recording of this session? No? Okay. Can I check, is there anybody here from the local press? No. In terms of these sessions being recorded, it is necessary that people please use the microphone. I'm only going to be hearing from people who are seated round the table who've expressed their right to be heard based on the representations that they made. We'll do introductions shortly. I'll just also remind everybody that in terms of this examination process, I'm being assisted by Independent Programme Officer Annette Feeney, who I think most people have met or spoken to over the course of this examination. And just a reminder, Annette is your port of call if you need have any questions about the examination process, need access to any of the documents, or have any kind of general queries about the process. Annette is based here in this building whilst we're sitting, but otherwise her contact details are on the examination website. Hopefully everybody is here this afternoon. We're talking about or discussing matter 9 for the examination, which is looking at a variety of policies. These are borough-wide policies, so they will apply across the borough, and they relate to policies for climate change, water and health this afternoon, and then we're going to be picking up the design aspect early next week. We're going to be following an agenda that I've previously published. It's been available for some time on the examination website, and I'm going to be asking some questions and wanting to hear from people around the table, specifically why the plan, from the council I'm anticipating to hear why the plan should be considered sound. From those who have raised soundness concerns or objections to the plan, I need to be clear on what sort of changes you are seeking to be made to the local plan document and why that should be considered necessary. We're undoubtedly going to hear differing views. As I say, these are intended to be structured, informal but respectful sessions. I'm going to be listening and making notes as we go along. And if there's anything further that I need from anybody, I'll make that clear as part of the discussion as we go along. I think looking around the table, most people took part at stage 1 hearings, so you know generally how these things work. But are there any initial questions around process or procedure for these examination hearings? No. In which case we'll dive straight into matter 9. It'd be helpful for me and for anybody watching the recording if I understand who's seated around the table and is going to participate in this afternoon's discussion. I'd like to start on my right, please, with the Council's team. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Paul Shadarevian, KC, acting for the Council.
My name is Matt Clifford. I'm a Senior Planning Policy Officer.
Hi, I'm Claire Rawcliffe, Natural Environment Manager.
I'm Jeff Horseman, Team Manager, Development Management for South Tyneside Council.
Good afternoon, my name's Lee Nicholson. I'm a Senior Environmental Protection Officer for South Tyneside Council, representing the lead local flood authority.
Good afternoon, I'm Chris Martin. I'm from the Home Builders Federation, so representative body for the house builders in England and Wales.
Good afternoon, I'm Dominic Waugh from Pegasus Group, representing Bellway Homes.
Good afternoon, sir. Jack Conroy, Savills Planning, representing Laverick Hall Farm Limited and Durham Cathedral.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Rachel Taylor. I'll be representing myself as a councillor in my private submission today.
Good afternoon, I'm Dave Green. I'm representing the Save the Felgates working group, Save the Felgate Greenbelt working group.
My name is Bob Latimer, retired mechanical engineer, campaigner from Whitburn.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Lavelle, I'm Vice Chair of Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum.
Hello, I'm Dave Herbert. I'm a councillor for the Green Party in South Tyneside.
Thank you for that, everybody. Now, I hope people have seen from the agenda that we're starting this afternoon's session. It's slightly out of issue order. I'm going to deal with issue 2 first, which is in relation to the water environment and policies relating to flood risk and water quality. That will probably take us through, might take us through to the point of a mid-afternoon adjournment or break at that point, and then we'll be picking up policies under issue 1 in relation to climate change, and then finally the borough-wide policies in terms of promoting healthy communities. As people probably around the table can recall from the stage 1 discussion, there was a lot of issues raised around water quality and the wastewater infrastructure in the borough. Again, just a reminder, what's under discussion this afternoon are the borough-wide policies as they're presented in the plan, and understanding whether they're going to be effective and consistent with national policy in relation to what they seek to do. Just I'm sure those who are interested in the matter have seen there's been a reasonable amount of additional material added to the examination website. Amongst that, I have, in response to an action point that I raised with the council following the stage 1 hearings, an update to their position statement, have a revised statement of common ground with the Environment Agency, and a revised statement of common ground with Northumbrian Water. I've also accepted into the examination, this is not by no means a complete list I'm going through, but I have recently, just before Christmas, a legal opinion submitted by Mr. Latimer that's in front of the examination, which no doubt we'll come on to discuss. And I've also recently accepted, people may have seen the final reports, the 3 reports from the Office for the Environmental Protection into their investigations into the Environment Agency, DEFRA and Ofwat, and behind that were the previous, or the kind of the ongoing, the papers that related to the kind of the ongoing investigation. So they're all on the examination website and can be discussed where relevant as part of this afternoon's discussion. I should probably also add to that, people will recall that when we were sitting in July, there was reference to ongoing appeals, planning appeals in the area. Obviously, the Whitburn Lodge appeal decision was published after the stage 1 hearings were concluded, but that decision and the associated cost decision is also in front of the examination. Is this on the evidence, Mr. Lavelle?
Yes, just on your comment that there's been additional material provided by the council, I'd just like to point out that I put some comprehensive rebuttal statements in about the 4 documents you mentioned there, but they've never been published.
I am aware of that issue, Mr. Lavelle. I think all I'll say at this point is I think there has been correspondence with the programme officer about those statements, and I think the advice has been you can talk to that this afternoon or weave into your points the issues you were going to raise, then we'll deal with it that way. Okay, I'm going to start then with issue, it's item, excuse me, item 1 on my agenda, and it's the policies around risk of flooding and conserving water quality. I'm going to deal with the flood risk issue first, then we'll come on to the water quality matter. Obviously, I raised this at my MIQs 911, 912, and 913 in terms of whether the approach that the council's taken in relation to flood risk in plan making and the policy framework around that when considering proposals for new development is soundly based in terms of whether it's consistent with national policy, going to be justified and effective. Mr. Clifford, please.
Firstly, dealing with flood risk evidence, a Level 1 strategic flood risk assessment was undertaken in 2022. This was accompanied by a site assessment and a detailed maps. These documents provide evidence about the present and future risk of flooding in South Tyneside from all sources of flooding, and to ensure that the SFRA reflected the most up-to-date position regarding Port and River sites, a Level 1 SFRA addendum was completed in 2023. This provides a strategic assessment of the suitability relative to flood risk of the sites of the Port of Tyne considered for allocation in the local plan. A Level 2 SFRA focused upon the available sites at the Port of Tyne was completed in 2024. The report found that, subject to further work, next steps, all of the available sites at the Port of Tyne can be safely developed. Moving on to the sequential test, it was updated in 2024 to consider the Level 1 SFRA addendum. An application of the sequential test for the proposed allocations for housing and general economic development has demonstrated that they pass the sequential test. Application of the sequential test for the proposed Port of Tyne allocations demonstrated that an SFRA Level 2 needed to be undertaken to demonstrate that those sites can be developed safely and without increasing flood risk elsewhere. And as I've already mentioned, there was a positive outcome to that Level 2 SFRA. Throughout the process, we have engaged with the Environment Agency. The response of the Environment Agency to the consultation on the draft Regulation 18 local plan stated, with respect to the sequential flood test, we agree with the methodology used and welcome reference to climate change when undertaking the sequential test. Their response also made several detailed comments about the Level 1 SFRA, which did not raise any concerns about the robustness of the documents. and this is set out in the Statement of Common Ground with the Environment Agency. The Statement of Common Ground between the Council and the Environment Agency includes the following comment under areas of agreement. The Environment Agency has confirmed that it supports the final DOC Level 2 SFRA as an evidence base in the local plan. So we consider we followed both national policy and guidance, and the approach is sound.
Thank you. And in terms of the plan, I mean, that's a helpful overview in terms of obviously sites that are allocated within the plan passing through the necessary sequential processes required by national planning policy. Policy 7, which is the flood risk and water management policy that will apply to all developments that come forward in the borough, sets out a number of measures that will need to be considered in relation to flood risk and water management. And thinking about the representations that have been made, one of the criteria within the policy is to basically not culvert or build over water courses. Is that approach justified, and is it consistent with national policy?
We consider the approach is justified. We stand by the statement within the PPG with regards to culverting in general and the potential for adverse impacts on flood risk, ecology, human health and safety and amenity, and the impacts that widespread culverting can have. However, the Council has obviously considered the representations that have been made, and it is prepared to consider a modification to criterion 6 in the policy. That modification is set out in the relevant MIQ. It is suggested that the current wording is retained, but that a further sentence is added to read, in agreement with the LFA, culverting for site access may be allowed when accompanied by an FRA demonstrating that the culverting can be achieved without adverse impacts and a suitable maintenance plan for the lifetime of the development.
Sorry, Mr. Clifford, can you direct, is that in the Matter 9 statement?
Yes, I think it's MIQ 9.13. Just double check that. 12, I should say, sorry.
I don't know if it's just me, but my statement doesn't have a modification in it at MIQ 912. I've made a note of.
It's 9:30. Sorry, I think it is actually MIQ 9.13, paragraph 9.68.
I've got, no, look. Is that the one?
No, it's this one. Culverting.
It's 913. So it's question 913.
Yep.
And paragraph 9.68, there's a table beneath it. Table 4, do you have that? I think you do. And there should be text in red.
Yep.
I do, but my question 913 is about criterion. It's another criteria, and then that text refers back to that criteria.
Sorry, just bear with
Yep.
me, sorry. Can you give us, can we move on? And what I'll do is just, sorry, I gave you the wrong reference as well. I need to double check because something may have gone wrong with the printing. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Whilst the council's looking at that, I'll move on, if I may, to question 913, criterion 9 of the policy. And criterion 9 refers to making the greater use of nature-based solutions that take a catchment-led approach. And I think in regard, various representations were made about this and whether there needs to be some sort of qualification or flexibility about this particular criterion in terms of seeking that where it's appropriate to do so. And I think this is what's picked up in table 4, or certainly my version of table 4 of the council's statement.
Yeah.
So I think the council's recognising the modification might be necessary to criterion 9 to introduce that degree of flexibility in terms of nature-based solutions.
Yes, sir, that's correct. The addition of where appropriate make.
Okay, well, let's see if I hear further from the council on that earlier point, but if I bring in others, please, just on the flood risk policy, policy 7, Mr. Conroy.
Thank you, sir. My comment was going to be in relation to criterion 6, which was relating to MIQ 9.12 regarding the culverting and building over water courses. So happy to postpone my response for now until the council have got an order.
Mr. Green.
Yeah, thanks. It's just on the point that's just been raised there in relation to building over culverts or water courses. You know, the council says, you know, that it is consistent with national planning practice that they don't do it, yet the developer, you know, on the SPAs disagrees, and it states, the disagreeing state policy 7 should be revised to allow consideration of development proposals seeking to either culvert or build over water courses to be held on a site-specific contextual basis, which may tie in with what's going on at the moment. But it seems to be that there's a disagreement between what South Tyneside Council is saying, that you don't build on it, and this applies to greenbelt sites throughout the borough, you know, because a lot of them have culverts, they have streams, they have, and the council's saying that they should not be built on, yet the developers are saying, just build on them, you know, we'll get around it. And you know, the consequences of that, I mean, you know, this, you know, on Felgate, there is a lot of culverts, there's streams run under the estate, nobody knows what they are, where they are, and to just build over it would be life-threatening, it would be a major disaster.
I think we've got the benefit of somebody here from representing the lead local flood authority, which am I right in thinking, Mr. Nicholson, in the situation where we are now, that is the responsibility of South Tyneside?
That's correct.
Also the lead local flood authority. So in terms of a general policy, well, a general position of the flood authority on culverting or constructing over water courses.
Yes, just to build on what was in 9.12, really, what was originally included in Policy 7 would be our starting position in line with the PBG. However, having read the MIQs, we accept that this may be a bit too firm, particularly with regards to providing access to proposals. So we have no issue with the qualifier in agreement with the LLFA. However, we would look to ensure any design is carried out in line with modern drainage design standards. So access, we can take a look at it on a side-by-side basis, but culverting across a red line boundary we would refer to the PPG.
So just so I'm clear, Mr Nicholson, the exception is really for kind of site access. It's not a...
It's contextual, isn't it?
Yeah.
It would be with regards to the site constraints, so we would look to limit it to something like site access or a crossing.
Okay, Mr Conroy.
Thank you, sir. It appears we discussed matter 9.12 anyway, so I'll jump in here. Yeah, look, we would agree with any proposed modification that allowed a contextual site-by-site basis. I mean, just looking here at, I think it's criterion 5, part 4 of policy SP8, clearly requires vehicular access to enter the site from the Mill Lane roundabout. Now, practically speaking, that would require the access road to cross Monkton Burn. Now, of course, reading policy 7, part 6, which to my mind reads explicitly as not building over any watercourses. Clearly there's concern about a potential conflict, so any potential modification to policy 7, part 6 to add flexibility to a site-by-site basis for building over those watercourses for access would be agreeable in principle to ourselves there.
Thank you. Councillor Herbert, please.
It was stated there that Tyne Dock will not suffer any problems with flooding. It already suffers problems with flooding from time to time, mainly through heavy rainfall, but it is on the River Tyne, which is tidal, and with climate change, sea levels are going to rise. I was just wondering how high a rise in sea level have they accounted for, because at the moment we're heading for about 2.7 to 3 degrees warming, which said there'll be several metres of sea level rise. So how can it be assured that they have actually factored in that to their calculations?
Thank you. Is that Mr Nicholson?
With regards to sea level rise, we are given climate change predictions by the EA. That includes nodal levels along the length of the Tyne, which include, like I say, climate change predictions to varying levels of events. So anything built along the Tyne, we ensure those levels of the finished floor levels are above what the nodal projections tell us. So we're protecting them across the life of the development.
And that's what time period that's over, it will gradually increase.
Mr Nicholson, as I understand it, I mean, some of the EA modelling is looking reasonably far ahead in terms of climate change scenarios.
So we are given climate change prediction. We've got current climate change prediction now. Typically, as I understand it, development is considered over 100 years. The prediction is based over 100 years, which would account for the typical lifespan of a development. So should the development disappear, we would start again with new projections, etc.
I think as Mr Clifford mentioned in his introductory remarks, and as I think I've read, the Port of Tyne has been subject to it's been subject to the level 2 strategic flood risk assessment, and the council's statement I think shows a plan or map, or the version of the statement I've got shows at figure 4 the Port of Tyne area. I think just to clarify from the council, is that showing that various sites have been amended or reduced, or that different parcels of land have been considered at different stages through the sort of combined employment land and flood risk? Or has everything on that plan been considered as part of the level 2 SFR strategic flood risk assessment work?
Yes, the employment sites. Sorry. The available employment sites in the Port of Tyne were considered as part of the level 2 SFRA. And an adjustment was made as a result of the findings. There was a slight reduction in employment supply, reflecting those findings.
Just on the issue of flooding, I've noted the various points that have been made. Obviously, the policy 7 itself prioritises the use of sustainable drainage systems, which we'll come on to shortly. I've got the Council's modification in relation to nature-based solutions. I think I will need, probably after this hearing session, if there is a modification to criterion 6, to see what that looks like. I'm afraid it's not in the version I've got.
I think that was an error on our part, a misunderstanding. So the only, I think the only modification proposed is in relation to criterion 9, which you have.
I do have.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I think I do need to be clear from the Council, because that does appear to be contrary to what I heard from Mr Nicholson and from Mr Clifford.
That's what's in the documentation at the moment, but we need to put...
That's what I'm seeking to clarify.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
There will be something else.
There will be something else coming along.
Okay.
In criterion 6, in relation to criterion 6.
Okay. Thank you. Before I move off the flood risk point, Mr Green, briefly.
Yeah, just to challenge the statement that Mr Conroy made in relation to the cover in the Monkton Burn. It's not just the Monkton Burn; it's across the entire site. So it's not just the one part of it, and it did create flooding downstream. Now the other thing is the sequential flood test. Now we're discussing public health and air quality on Felgate tomorrow, but this is sort of it overlaps. So if I could mention it, if you could just put us right if I'm going into tomorrow's. I'd like to challenge it. I'd like to challenge the accuracy and the robustness of it, and it might not be just a case on Felgate. It could be with any green belts within the whole area.
Sorry, Mr Green, what robustness are you challenging?
It's this sequential flood test, which Mr Clifford mentioned.
I appreciate. I mean, we obviously looked at flood risk as part of stage 1 discussions, right, specifically in relation to Felgate. Is it a general point about the methodology of the...
It's just, yeah, because I can't understand how you can have, and I know we did discuss this, so it'll be very brief, how we can have one part in 0 flood zone risk 1, and the other part next door in flood zone risk 3A and B. Because obviously that presents, massive consequences if flood zone 3A and B is correct. But it's the best way. I mean, I always say pictures speak 1,000 words, and if I may, I can't understand how you can put a flood zone 1 on an area which has caution ditch liable to flooding on it. I know that might sound, and that could happen in all areas. I mean, why is that there if that area is a 0% flood risk? I just can't understand the logic of the flood test. It's crazy, because it does pictures speak 1,000 words, and if you're saying the 0% flood risk or surface water risk, why is there a caution ditch liable to flooding all the way down the part which says that we're flood zone 1?
Okay, I think we are.
Yeah, I'll leave that one there. Yeah,
thank you. Yes, if we obviously picked that up as part of the stage 1 discussion. I mean, I'm mindful that the flood risk, the strategic flood risk work has been agreed with the Environment Agency, or the Environment Agency have raised no particular concerns. There may be very specific reasons why something goes from flood zone 1 straight to flood zone 3, but I think we'll probably not discuss that this afternoon. Are there any further points people wish to raise in relation to the flood risk policies? I think the points that had been raised in representations have been addressed by the Council. So I'm going to move on to water quality. There's a variety of policies within the plan that address this. Policy 9 seeks the introduction, or seeks sustainable drainage systems, sometimes often referred to SUDs, seeking them on major developments. I'm sort of going slightly over policy 9, but we may come back to it. And then policy 10 deals with the disposal of foul water from development. It sets out a hierarchy that should be achieved, and then sets out various other criteria in relation to specific types of development. In terms of the Council's statement that's before me, in terms of the effectiveness and consistency of policy 10, if I can understand from you address it, I think in response to my MIQs 9.14 through to 9.17, sort of paragraph 9.71 onwards from your statement. But these are policies that have attracted, or policy 10 has attracted significant interest. Heard a lot at the stage 1 hearings in relation to the sewage infrastructure network in the southeast of the borough, in the Whitburn area, through to Hendon, about the ability of that network to accommodate further demands upon it. We're obviously dealing this afternoon with the borough-wide policies and how they're going to apply across the borough. But I think in terms of the effectiveness and the consistency with national policy, particularly of policy 10, I'll invite the Council to talk to that first. I don't know as part of that whether the Council wants to say anything about the legal opinion that's been submitted just before Christmas.
The answer to the latter question is yes. In order to assist you, you shouldn't expect any difference in our stance. As a result of that, I forewarn you. But I will address the legal opinion and also the impact of recent findings by the office in relation to the failure of other statutory bodies to carry out their various duties and functions appropriately. I think, if I may suggest, that I deal with that by way of response to anything further Mr. Lavelle has to say, because these documents were introduced, I think, through him or by him. We've not taken any exception to that. We're happy to consider them and to respond to them if that assists you. But in doing it that way, it means that there's less of the ball game backwards and forwards, if you know what I mean. But in the first instance, in terms of the effectiveness of this policy, I think we can deal with that initially. Over to you. Going to deal with it?
Yes. So in terms of the effectiveness of the Council's approach, well, firstly, Policy 10, disposal of foul water. First point I'd like to make is it's part of a wider policy framework and regulatory measures that deal with the issue. The policy does not relate directly to the capacity of the sewer network. However, paragraph 7.59 of the supporting text does acknowledge that capacity is a material consideration. Capacity is also addressed strategically through plan making. The Council has liaised with Northumbrian Water and established that there is capacity to support the development allocations in the local plan. And whilst the disposal of foul or wastewater remains an important issue, the recent Whitburn Lodge appeal decision reaffirms that foul water and wastewater capacity are measures governed by separate regulatory regimes, and that planning decisions should focus on the use of land, not the control of process and emissions. Policies 5, 9 and 11 are also relevant in this context. Policy 5, reducing energy consumption and carbon emissions. Criterion 1, Roman italic 5, supports sustainable design and construction practices that include water efficiency that meets the highest national standard. And water efficiency benefits wastewater management by reducing the amount of waste of the amount that's not entering the sewer network. And Criterion 3 of Policy 5 requires major development proposals to include a sustainability statement outlining their approach to a range of sustainability issues, including wastewater management. Moving on to Policy 9, Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. It sets out the Council's approach to SUDS through the Development Management System. Paragraph 7.53 states surface water separation as directing water to surface bodies also reduces surface water entering sewage systems that can contribute to combined sewer outflows in extreme wet weather. And Policy 9 provides a framework for the LFA to ensure that every opportunity has been explored to keep surface water out of the combined sewer network. In respect of Policy 11, it's not part of the approach to managing wastewater through the planning process. However, its effectiveness is partly dependent on the effectiveness of the approach to managing wastewater. So in summary, the Council considers that Policy 10 is an effective approach and is supported by Policies 5 and 9, which contribute to reducing the amount of surface water entering the network. This is an overall effective approach to ensuring the satisfactory disposal of foul water from new development. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If I can now turn to those who perhaps take a different view on the matter. If I perhaps hear from Mr. Lavelle first, and then I'll come to Mr. Latimer. So, Mr. Lavelle.
Thank you. The policies for 10 and 11 in the plan, they're not based on proportionate evidence. As the evidence used to justify the plan, it's neither robust nor up to date. The update regarding sewer network submitted by the Council as part of the documents is misleading and contains information that's not correct. I submitted a comprehensive rebuttal to the evidence referred to in this update in October 2025, but my evidence is missing from the examination as it was not published. The Council have failed in their duty to cooperate as they have not engaged constructively, actively and on an ongoing basis with neighbouring councils and public bodies such as Ofwat, DEFRA, the Environment Agency and the Office for Environmental Protection to develop the strategic policies on the disposal of foul water and protecting water quality. The Council, again today, claimed to work closely with the Environment Agency and Northumbrian Water. Consultation between the Council and Northumberland Water, or the Council and the Environment Agency on the local plan last took place at Regulation 19 stage. The Council has not consulted with the Environment Agency regarding the Guidance on Storm Overflow Assessment Framework 2025, published on 24th of March, which has a significant bearing on the improvements required to reduce sewage spills at Whitburn and Hendon. There's been no active engagement regarding the Ofwat decision notice and Northumberland Water's undertakings in respect of the Hendon-Whitburn system, published in June 2025. There's been no engagement regarding the recent Office for Environmental Protection findings in December 2025 regarding the Environment Agency unlawfully failing to take proper account of environmental law with regard to the requirements of the 1994 urban wastewater regulations. The OEP had particular regard to the contents of the letter dated 3rd of February 2023 from the Director General Environment of the European Commission to Mr. Robert Latimer concerning spills of untreated wastewater at Whitburn and the data concerning spills at Whitburn since the 2012 European Court of Justice judgment. The regulatory processes have failed and continue to fail to ensure that the sewer network serving the Whitburn, Claydon and Boldens can cope with the demands of planned growth within the Hendon Sewage Treatment Works catchment without significant harm to the environment. The plan is not positively prepared. It's not based on a strategy which seeks to meet objectively assessed development and infrastructure requirements. There's been no joint consultation between South Tyneside Council and Sunderland City Council and appropriate bodies regarding the cumulative effect on the Hendon Whitburn sewage system of the 625 houses proposed in this plan, together with over 1,000 houses proposed as part of the Riverside Sunderland Master Plan, which are also part of the Hendon Whitburn sewage catchment area. Northumberland Water has failed to produce a wastewater treatment works plan, a network flow compliance plan, and failed to provide a plan for an additional study at Whitburn by the 8th of December last year, as agreed in their undertaking to Ofwat. The Northumbria River Basin District Management Plan was last updated in 2015, so it's out of date. Since then, we've had the installation of event duration monitors on combined sewer overflows throughout the borough, which provides significant data to inform such a plan. I'll just touch on the Whitburn Lodge appeal. The evidence provided to this appeal is not factual. I'll highlight these two. Northumberland Water are implementing the necessary regimes to ensure pollution controls are operating effectively and outside the realms of planning decisions. They're not. No plan has been developed as yet. Another example. Northumberland Water also detailed that redevelopment of this site would see a reduction in the volume of flows entering the existing public sewage system, therefore having a positive impact on matters of concern related to drainage, both surface and foul. This is not true. There will be an increase in flows. These statements should have been challenged by the Council. I'll touch on what the barrister will want to speak about. The leading case on the overlap between planning and pollution controls is now the case of the National Farmers Union versus Herefordshire Council, the JPL 1364. I'll quote from that judgment. An approach which assumed no environmental harm on the basis of a regulatory regime which, beyond any doubt, has failed to protect the environment from harm would be contrary to the statutory purposes. There is therefore good reason to depart from 194 of the 2023 NPPF. This case law was not mentioned in the Whitburn Lodge appeal. I wasn't invited to the 15th of September meeting to discuss the appeal decision, but I would have argued that the Council should have identified the omission to consider the case law and should have recommended the local planning authority to apply for judicial review of this decision. Obviously, you're out of time now, aren't we? I'd just like to touch on betterment, which is a big thing in my mind. In this appeal, in the end, the claim of betterment was reduced to providing a certainty to what surface water will be entering the combined sewer. It's obvious the volumes of combined sewage will increase. The betterment argument relied upon in this decision has no legal definition. I'd like to supply the examination with a definition of betterment that is more relevant to wastewater pollution. Wastewater pollution betterment refers to the efforts and actions taken to improve the quality of wastewater before it is released into the environment. These include reducing the amount of wastewater generated, treating it properly to remove harmful contaminants, and ensuring that treated wastewater is reused or recycled for beneficial purposes. Due to the increase of wastewater from the proposed developments on greenfield sites in the plan, there will be no wastewater pollution betterment. Wastewater pollution at Whitburn will get worse unless improvements in the Hendon Whitburn sewage system are made. So I've provided you with alternative wording for policy 10. I don't know if you've received it.
Not at this stage. My recollection from your original representations is made on behalf of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum is that I appreciate this is a couple of years ago now, Mr. Lavelle, and as you've highlighted, a number of things have changed. I think I would just like to clarify, for the purposes of this examination, we don't have the action plan that Northumbrian Water have submitted to Ofwat.
So they haven't submitted it yet, sir?
It's not in front of me, it's not in front of, but you know, I don't know if they have submitted something to...
No, they haven't submitted it. I spoke to the MP's office this morning and she spoke to Ofwat.
Okay. In terms of the wording for policy 10, my recollection from your representations, Mr. Lavelle, is that you were seeking something similar to what's in the Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan at policy WMP 12, that there should be a rigorous analysis.
You did ask me if my position remained the same, and I did send you a reply to say it is altered now.
Okay, can you just briefly summarise to me what your altered position is?
I can read it out if you like.
Because from the stage 1 hearings, I was sort of coming away thinking, well, is it the view of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum and others that there should be some form of moratorium on development, there shouldn't be anything further? Bearing in mind this is a borough-wide policy we're looking at as part of this discussion, or was it similar to where we were before, that there's, from your perspective, if I put it in these terms, still a degree of uncertainty about how the system is going to improve and get into regulatory compliance, notwithstanding some of the evidence I've heard about that, that there is effectively a stronger policy rather than a moratorium.
Because of the council's position on the Whitburn Lodge appeal and some of the statements they put to the local planning authority, I've now revisited where we're talking about rigorous analysis, and I've got wording of a more strategic approach.
Thank you. If I can hear that now, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Right, this is the more strategic approach. Bear with me. I would suggest the following main modification. New development will not be permitted in the Whitburn sewage catchment area, that is Whitburn, Clevedon and Walden areas, unless there is an independent and verifiable planning assessment demonstrating that there is adequate sewage and surface water drainage infrastructure to serve the development. The assessment must demonstrate that the proposed development would not lead to harm to local watercourses or the coastal waters or foreshore of the South Tyneside area by way of sewage and other pollution, or problems for existing residents or residents subsequently occupying the development. The planning assessment will consider treatment and dry weather flow capacity at the wastewater treatment works at Hendon and, if deemed necessary, at Howden versus consents. It will consider if the net increase in wastewater will be adequately collected and treated in compliance with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Regulations 1994. The assessment must be carried out jointly between the local authority, the Environment Agency and Northumbrian Water. The assessment must identify any additional interventions which would be cost beneficial consistent with BTKNEEC, in accordance with the requirements of the Environment Agency's guidance on Storm Overflow Assessment Framework 2025, published on 24th of March 2025. The assessment must be published in draft form and made available for public consultation before it is finalised. Where the sewage treatment works are close to capacity and/or improvements are required to the sewage network to comply with the urban wastewater treatment regulations, the local planning authority will look at potential for phased development and use a Grampian condition to ensure development comes forward in line with the required upgrades. Development will only be permitted where it is demonstrated that surface water drainage will not add to the existing site runoff or cause any adverse impact to neighbouring properties and the surrounding environment. This is quite wordy, but I try to include everything on a strategic level.
Thank you for that. So I think in summary, Mr. Lavelle, you're seeking a more kind of, I think it still comes under the banner of kind of a rigorous analysis, but you're setting out more detail in terms of what
I would be satisfied with rigorous, apart from the fact that the council decided rigorous is rather a subjective phrase to use. Although they accepted the neighbourhood plan, they've now stated that they obviously don't believe in the Whitburn sewage policy because they disagree with the use of the word rigorous.
So for your modification, rather than the word rigorous, you're setting out those various kind of parameters that a development proposer would need to satisfy in order for it to go ahead through those kind of various steps.
I think that would be an appropriate approach, bearing in mind the history of the Whitburn Hendon sewage treatment works, and it will be. I'm trying to guess what Northumbrian Water plan will be, and I think it'll be something along those lines, sir.
Thank you. Does the council want? I was going to go to Mr. Latimer next.
It was Mr. Latimer I should have referred to. Apologies. I'd be very happy to hear Mr. Latimer first.
Okay, so I can next hear from Mr. Latimer, and can I invite Mr. Latimer, can you use the microphone because it will help people in the room and online.
I forgot my notes and Steve's managed to get it on there. Well, my name's Bob Latimer. I was born and still live in Whitburn. I used to be the local garage owner. I'm an engineer by trade, and I have an engineering business. I retired about 12 years ago. My youngest son took over. We worked in the Nissan car plant installing the machines, and the plant became the most productive car plant in Europe, which is something I'm really proud of. So on that basis, I'm used to finding faults and diagnosing things, and I just want to put it across that I'm not just, making this up. If I start by saying I feel it cannot be right for a local plan inquiry to process to be considered acceptable when it is left to the public to highlight the serious errors in its preparation. The plan was rejected at least twice by the planning committee and the councillors who represent the public. Now it is left to the public to convince you why this plan is not fit for purpose and it should be thrown out. The local plan has been refused by all local councillors at least twice. They represented the represented the opinions of the people of South Tyneside. There's been a local plans from East Bolton and Whitburn entered and approved by the council, and again they showed the opinions of the local people. But this local plan does not include their policies about the local sewage treatment. Now a few of us, as local individuals, have to try and make sure that this local plan safeguards the rights of local people and also their health and safety of the environment. Against us, we have the local planning authority, we have the council officers and their barrister, paid for by us. I've got to laugh. The developers, the church commissioners, and in the background, the water company and NWL and the EA. I want to say that I rely upon you, the inspector, to accept the responsibility of putting the safe disposal of treatment of sewerage and the capacity needed for that treatment and the protection of our environment into the local plan of South Tyneside. This is not what the Council and the LPA intend to do, as can be seen by Policy 10, which remains the same as it was when it was refused by the local councillors. I took part in the 2001 public inquiry regarding the Whitburn storm system, when it was found immediately that the permit wasn't fit for purpose. The inspector at that public inquiry made the following comment. The model's shortcomings were identified in a 1993 technical audit report, which recommended that the model should be changed before being used for design purposes, otherwise it was likely to significantly underestimate CSO spillage and storage requirements. However, construction had started and NWL rejected the recommendation. Today, that is what was wrong with the system. CSO spillage and storage. The council and the EA stood back and allowed this to happen, and it appears no one wants to mention this at this inquiry. Adding more houses to this system would be a horrendous error. In 2012, the European Court of Justice found the Whitburn system was not complying with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, although the EA and Northumbrian Water said it was, and gave the UK 5 years to upgrade the Whitburn system by the end of December. In 2023, the Whitburn system spilled over 1 million tonnes of untreated sewage, the greatest volume ever. Now that was, I don't know, what's that, 6 years after the judgment. Also, although not part of the original system, using the screening pumps, over 300,000 tonnes of sewage was returned back into the foul sewer, showing beyond doubt that there's no capacity to take any more. The council quote NPPF paragraph 188 as saying policies should only concern themselves with land use, with the use of land, rather than the control of processes and emissions. I've provided a legal opinion and 2 pieces of recent case law showing this is incorrect. Since the stage 1 hearings, there have been a number of important things which should affect the local plan. There's, in the addition of our local plan about the NPPF, of 2 recent cases which will become case law, and there are many more to come. There have been several updates from OEP about illegal actions by Ofwat and the EA and DEFRA. These show the LPA cannot trust and believe evidence given by the EA. There's been a lot of mention of a study by NWL for Ofwat about the Whitburn system improvements, which they received on December the 8th, 2025, but have not been able to see the content. It is important the inspector sees this, if only to find out the likely date of such improvements. Until then, there is no capacity for more sewage. I had a meeting with our MP and with the Minister following a letter from Emma Hardy saying the scheme for Whitburn, Longsea Outfall, is unlikely to meet design standards in 10 years, and that the reduction plan will be met in 2050. I'm 82, so I'll not see it. Her department stated after the meeting that Ofwat don't have a time frame, but we will know more at December the 8th. Again, there has been a delay to house building until there's a definite date when there will be more capacity. Policy 10 is inadequate to provide this. You ask about the effect of the Whitburn Lodge appeal. We have legal confirmation that the appeal wrongly depended upon incorrect information from NWL and EA and the local planning authority. I think it was the local lead flood authority. The inspector asked the council a straight question. Would policy 10 be part of an effective approach to ensure the satisfactory disposal of foul water from new development? The council replies, yes, when the evidence and the discharge records confirm policy 10 would be no good whatsoever as an effective approach. In fact, to allow policy 10 to play any part of this local plan would give licence to NWL to dump even more foul water. The inspector goes on and asks a further question about including the Whitburn Forum's wording of rigorous analysis. The council replies, no, it would not be necessary for the plan soundness for policy 19 to be comparatively worded to policy WNP 12 in the Maid Whitburn neighbourhood plan. The council considers the word rigorous to be highly subjective, and this would lead to practical difficulties with implementation. This is a hypocritical response from the council when you consider policy WN 12 was watered down by AECOM, the council, and then the inspector, but was adopted as part of the neighbourhood plan. And now the council say rigorous is subjective. When it was on their recommendation, it was used. They will have no analysis of applications apart from liaising, or let's say agreeing with NWL and the EA, who have been totally discredited by Ofwat and the OEP. Does the recent planning appeal decision at Whitburn Lodge mean policy 10 would be effective and consistent with NPPF? Paragraph 188, policies should concern themselves with the use of land rather than the control of processes. My concern is Whitburn. But as an example of the lack of sewerage capacity, I want to just tell you about the flows of sewerage around the proposed Hebburn Riverside Master Plan, which show how useless the policies about sewerage capacity is and how very little that the council is actually carrying out investigations to back up what they're saying. Wagonway Road Pumping Station, Hebburn. Now, it's possibly that the Felgate site will be connected to that. In 2024, it discharged the sea for 2,946 hours. That's spilling into the River Tyne. The Tyneside CSO near the Tyne Tunnel, that would be the other one Felgate could connect to. 932 hours of spills into the River Don, and then it goes into the Tyne. The Howden Treatment Works, 2024. It has 3 overflows. The first one, 2,523 hours in 2024. 1,379 and 10 hours, 723 hours, all spilling into the River Tyne. And then it goes into the sea. The River Tyne's nothing more than an open sewer. And, you know, I just cannot see where, especially environmental health, where are you? As an example of relying on assurances, this shows the lack of any real investigation into figures supplied by the NWL to the local planning authority. There's definitely a lack of capacity at sewage treatment in the whole of South Tyneside. Again, as an example of relying on assurances from NWL and the EA, I need to tell you about the suggestion in the post-hearing letter, Action Points Sewer Network capacity that Hendon will only receive flows from 420 new houses at South Tyneside, but the 400 houses that will be built at Town End Farm area will flow to Alexander Bridge. Next to Alexander Bridge is an overflow into the River Wear, where I've seen numerous discharges. In November, next to Alexander Bridge is the overflow of the River Wear, where I've seen numerous discharges. In November 2025, for instance, there were 38 hours of flows into the river, and they wanted to put another 400 houses into that. The sewerage system overflows everywhere, Now, there can be no confidence that there's capacity for any more.
I'm just going to intervene there, Mr. Latimer.
Well, I want to say to you what should be done.
That's where I was hoping we were getting to. Yep, that's what I need to
Right,
understand.
well, you know, I just feel, you know, we're not getting across what we want to say. You know, it's like you're saying, I'm short of time. You know, I'm only one person. There's a lot of persons here. Policy 10, the planners do not agree to a rigorous analysis. They show the most minimal concern for evidence about the capacity of the sewage system. They still, I cannot get that word out, arrogantly say they liaison with AA and NWL and rely on their information and assurances. Do we agree with that? You know, the people here, do we agree with that? NWL and the AA are totally discredited. There's no doubt about that. By Ofwat and the OEP, even shown they've actually acted illegally. Would anyone else here seek vital information and assurances which would affect their households, thousands of households, and the environment from such discredited sources? I wouldn't even buy a second-hand car from these people. Policy 10 and others must include rulings that the local planning authority have independent verification of all data about the sewage capacity. If new building goes on, it is likely that soon 2 million tonnes of untreated sewer will be discharged to sea. Will the buyers or renters of these new houses assume that all their sewage is out of sight and will be treated? They will more probably see it again in their local stream, or at the beach, or even flooding their house. This is what the planners are allowing to happen. It is vital that the local plan is corrected to deal with today's problems and not just give a green light for the council and the planners to act as they have been. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Latimer. I mean, just before Christmas, you submitted or requested that the legal opinion be submitted, and I've read that, and I'm sure other people have as well. My interpretation or assessment of that legal opinion is it obviously sets out whether the council's position is unreasonable or not, and whether it's reasonable to consider kind of alternatives, and there could be alternative policy wording to policy 10. From your perspective, is that alternative policy wording similar to what I've heard from Mr. Lavelle? Is it more, well, we need something very similar to the Whitburn neighbourhood plan in terms of a rigorous analysis? Is that what you're...
No.
I'm
an engineer, and it can't proceed any further until it has a real investigation, not only for the future, but what has gone on. It's like, you know, you have to, if you were repairing a machine in Nissan, you have to go back to see how it was designed in the first place, and you have to look at that and say, how can we go forward in the future? How can we repair that? Now, this system has gone beyond that. It's not just the treatment works, it's the actual system itself. And I think the whole of South Tyneside, we don't have a treatment works. You know, Whitburn's a storm system, and they're using it as a treatment works. And, you know, South Tyneside sewage goes to Howden. Now, I've just showed you, Howden doesn't have the capacity. And what's wrong with these people? Why aren't they? Why is it I can find that out and they can't? I think the local plan shouldn't proceed at all until we get reassurances in the actual sewerage system for the whole of South Tyneside is investigated.
I do want to come back to the council, if it's a very brief point, Mr. Lavelle.
Just to touch on what Mr. Latimer said, we had a meeting with the Water Minister, and what we want is we want a judge-led inquiry into the sewage system at Whitburn and Hendon. Obviously, what she faulted us off with is wait till December the 8th, you'll get the plan. We'll take it from there. But as I pointed out to you, I phoned the MP's office this morning. Northumbrian Waters failed to produce that plan as yet.
There may well be other points people want to raise in relation to policies 9, 10 and 11. I think I'm going to give the Council the opportunity to respond to what's specifically been raised in relation to Whitburn, because I'm not sure, Mr Green, you're going to talk about Whitburn specifically, and I don't recall your representation relevant to this session on wastewater.
Yeah, it was just to follow up what Mr Latimer said about Howden and the problems. No,
I know you've raised the issue under health, and it's part of your appendices to your health submissions for tomorrow's session.
That's the case. Yeah, can I also state that I totally agree with Mr Lavelle in that I think that's exactly what he's just said. I mean, I've got all the documents. We read through most of them, but the same thing applies to SP8. That it is the same. It's exactly the same circumstances.
Okay, thank you. If I can turn to the Council. As the Council will have heard and it will have seen from representations that have been made on the plan going back to 2024, particularly there is a geographical dimension to this in terms of the concern about the wastewater network, as I say, in the southeast of the borough of Whitburn, that there should be a similar policy approach in this plan as there was in the Whitburn neighbourhood plan in terms of rigorous analysis. I've heard, I'm afraid it is for the first time this afternoon, from Mr Lavelle in terms of there could be an alternative policy wording. I'm going to say it's along broadly similar lines, but maybe some more deep. But the principle remains: can we have a policy that requires the council, as part of its decision-making process, to rigorously analyse development proposals to ensure that there is capacity within the sewage network to accommodate development going forward?
I'm going to deal with this as concisely as I can, but in dealing with that final point, and I know that's what you want the focus to be on because you have an understanding of the legal process and the requirements placed on local planning authorities, if I may suggest I deal with some background first in order to contextualise my submissions, and so that members of the public might understand the reasons why I'm making the submissions I am. First and foremost, one can understand public disquiet about the performance of the undertaker. And not only the undertaker, but also those statutory bodies responsible for monitoring its performance. And there's been a plethora of actions and enforcement actions taken in relation to those bodies by the Office for Environmental Protection, as well as Ofwat's action against Northumbrian Water. So in one way or another, all of these responsible authorities, including the Environment Agency and DEFRA, have let the system down. So I can well understand exactly why people feel very sensitive about this. However, the starting point for our consideration is national planning policy. And that requires that planning decisions should assume that the regimes, i.e. those which are carried out, undertaken or applied by the various authorities to which I've referred, and that regime which applies to Northumbrian Water will operate effectively. Clearly in the past they haven't. That's been an issue. That's a starting point. The MPPF is planning policy. It is not law. It is a material consideration, but an important material consideration. And there are good reasons why government asks us to defer to those other regimes as a means of making the planning system more efficient so that these regimes work in tandem, not in a frictional way. The basic duty imposed on Northumbrian Water is to maintain the capacity, the sewerage capacity. and it is the right of any developer to connect to the system. So it's the duty of the undertaker to make sure that capacity exists and that it complies, in making that capacity available, complies with its obligations under statute and the regulations. You will understand, sir, and I'm sure everyone round here will understand, that the regulatory regime in relation to wastewater is extremely complex. And that regime has to be informed by an extraordinarily complex database and scientific understanding of the impacts of dealing with wastewater on the environment and the means by which any adverse effect might be obviated. It's very complex, and it requires, of course, not just an understanding of the current situation, but also on capacity requirements for future needs. And I make that point now because I'm going to come back to it in the context of what's being proposed by way of a potential modification to the policy. Okay. Now, I've read the opinion of Mr. Shattock, a fellow barrister, and it is a model of elegant concisiveness, and it does set out the law absolutely and utterly correctly. So I do not demur from the opinion. However, the opinion takes us only so far, as inevitably it could. The exhortation by central government to assume that the regimes will operate effectively is, of course, subject to a local planning authority acting reasonably. So if it is possessed of information which suggests that it should be on notice as to the adequacy of the system to cope with the amount of development coming through the system and to deal with it within the parameters of the regulations and the pollution control regime, then, of course, it may become a relevant material consideration for planning purposes in determining whether or not the development should be allowed to proceed, or whether or not, for example, the occupation of the development ought to be regulated in some way to ensure that future capacity is available for the needs of the future population without harm occurring to the environment. That depends upon the exercise, the reasonable exercise of planning discretion. But a local planning authority is not bound, as it were, to investigate of its own accord any potential failures that may exist, but is not prevented from doing so if circumstances compel it to do so. So where are we? You've had the evidence of Northumbrian Water, whose evidence to this examination was given after the various enforcement actions and judgments had been undertaken and made. They do not object to any development proposed in the local plan. And so far as they're concerned, there will be adequate capacity to deal with the growth anticipated in the plan. I'll come back to them in a minute. Ofwat's action against Northumbrian Water, and I can summarise it. It's on the Ofwat's website. They concluded that Northumbrian Water contravened regulations, including Section 94 of the Water Industry Act 1991. But they went on to say that Northumbrian Water has provided undertakings under Section 19 of the 91 Act that will see it commit to investing an additional £15.7 million to improve the quality of the environment in its region and further reduce spills. This will be entirely funded by the company and its shareholders rather than customers. Northumbrian Water has also committed to developing and delivering a series of action plans, which you've heard about, that will address the contraventions we have identified and bring it back into compliance with its obligations. That's essentially what Ofwat has found. It's happy with that outcome. I don't know where the 5-year action plan is at the moment. I'm not quite sure that we've had any further response since last time. We are still following that up. But we don't anticipate there are going to be any problems with it at the moment. In that context, and given that assurance, there is nothing to put us on notice that we should be concerned about instigating a separate inquiry into the capacity of the sewerage network for the purposes of this plan. And neither does it put us on notice that we should be considering a device in policy terms that requires us to carry out such an investigation. Because what it would do is impose a layer of interrogation in the plan that would impose a positive obligation on the local planning authority to assess capacity and performance of the undertaker sewerage infrastructure each time it considers an application for permission in relation to a major proposed development. You can go back to the point I was making before about how complex that assessment would be. It would be time-consuming. It would be far-reaching in its other implications too, in terms of the technical knowledge needed to come to any verifiable decision which was not based upon assurances from the undertaker itself, i.e., independently gathered information, and would have a disproportionate and wholly unacceptable impact on resources. And, equally importantly, the effectiveness of the plan in delivering much-needed development in a timely manner. It would not be appropriate to impose any further layer of scrutiny. What I do propose, however, is that we can make it abundantly clear that even though Northumbrian Water is not a statutory undertaker, and is not a statutory consultee as an undertaker, that we will consult with Northumbrian Water on the issue of capacity in relation to major developments as they come forward, either via the allocations or independently if they come apart from an allocation. And that can be made clear in the supporting text at paragraph 7.59 of the plan. So I'm saying that what I'm asking you to do effectively is to exercise your planning judgment, which you're entitled to do, taking into account everything that's been said around this table, taking into account all that is available publicly in terms of the Ofwat report and the other material which has been submitted to the examination by Mr. Latimer and others, and come to the conclusion that it would not be reasonable or necessary to impose any policy requirement that would result in the kind of delays in expenditure, unnecessary delays in expenditure, by imposing that further level of scrutiny in circumstances where it's been found that the statutory undertaker will perform in accordance with the evidence you've heard from that undertaker to this examination. So those are my submissions.
Thank you. Is there anything further the Council wishes to say? I mean, some of the further evidence that's been put to me is the Office for Environmental Protection reports. They're fairly recent. One of them was to the Environment Agency, which is probably the one I've focused the most on. They're described as final and concluding reports, so notwithstanding everything that's preceded them. And it's recognised that there is an issue, I think, in terms of the permitting, but it has given the Environment Agency time, and it will recognise that this is going to take some time to work through. Thinking about some of the developments that are in the plan that we're talking about in this part of the borough, notwithstanding this is a borough-wide policy, when I look at the Schlar, a number of them are not due to take place or be built out anytime soon. They're a few years away from first, so there's a period of time between now and when some of these sites are likely to come forward. I mean, Whitburn Lodge probably will come forward sooner than later. Okay, they didn't hang about. You referred, Mr. Shadreven, to, there was, in terms of the local planning authority acting reasonably, depending, as you say, what response you get from Northumbrian Water, the occupation could be regulated in some way. Mr. Lavelle referred to a Grampian condition, but there could be conditions around the phasing of developments when development is occupied. Is it necessary in your view, or to tell me that whether any of something along those lines could be reflected in a modified policy 10, or is that unnecessary? That's
It's both unnecessary and imposes an awkward requirement. And I say an awkward requirement because clearly if there is an issue, it's something which needs to be addressed anyway as a material consideration at application stage. And if information comes to light that there is potentially a problem, and discussions, consultations with Northumbrian Water discloses that there might be a problem with capacity in the system, then either it might be appropriate at that stage for the local planning authority in its development management function to impose either a Grampian condition or a condition which limits occupation until such time as the matter is resolved to the local planning authority's satisfaction. But those are not matters which one can predict, as it were, through the policy, and not having a requirement in the policy doesn't prevent, and should not prevent, the local planning authority from acting lawfully at that point in time. So those safeguards are there anyway.
Thank you. And just a final point for the council before I bring in others. Been referred to the Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan, policy WMP 12. I heard your submissions, Mr. Shaderavian, around the reasonableness and whether going through the process of a rigorous analysis is a proportionate and kind of acceptable impact on resources. Can you understand from the, not you, but whether it's other people from the council, understand from the community's perspective, they've had a made neighbourhood plan less than 3 years ago. They had this policy requirement put in, it was examined. The council has the borough council has a role in that process in terms of general conformity. It's obviously passed through the eye of that examination. Why is it now, 3 years later, something similar is just too onerous for this plan? And have I got to kind of treat that neighbourhood plan with a degree of caution?
First of all, these submissions are not made in any way dismissively of the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan deals with one development in Whitburn. We're dealing here with a plan-wide development. And secondly, things have moved on since then with respect to the findings of Ofwat and the response by Northumbrian Water, matters which were very much more up in the air at that point in time. Now, so you may take the view, well, actually, I'm sympathetic to that. I think we ought to impose it. If you do, then that will be part of your recommendation. All I can do is make submissions to you on whether or not such an approach is necessary, which I've done, and what the implications of imposing such a requirement would be on outcomes, and particularly the effectiveness of the plan in delivering much needed development.
Thank you. I'll come back to the Whitburn community next, and then after I've heard from them, it's probably likely we'll take a mid-afternoon break. So I'll hear from who wants to go first, Mr. Latimer or Mr. Lavelle?
First of all, I'd just like to point out that the Whitburn neighbourhood plan didn't deal with just one development. It was a neighbourhood area.
Yes, you're absolutely right. When I say one development, I meant a smaller development area.
Yeah, it's a neighbourhood area. It's just not one development. And I'll give the council the due. I met with the leader of the council of that department with Bob, I think about 8 years ago. At that time, they said, we don't have the resources, you know, to investigate these matters, etc. But I'll give them the due. They've built up a fantastic sort of understanding, you know, and it isn't as complex as it pointed out. In net effect, what the storm overflow assessment says, Whitburn long sea overflow should not spill any more than 10 spills a year. So the plan should set out, which hasn't been produced yet, how they're going to achieve that. And as Bob pointed out, there was a previous improvement plan to get the spills down at Whitburn to below 20 in line with the European Court judgment. That hasn't been achieved. It's unlikely, or the departments are saying it's unlikely to be achieved. And with respect to the investment, the £15.7 million, it's got nothing to do with Whitburn. They're giving it to charities. No overflows have been identified in the £2 million investment. It's all pie in the sky. It's all wishful thinking. Northumbrian Water has been scrutinised and have been found to fail. They should produce a plan, and that plan should say how they're going to actually comply with the law. They have to comply with the law. You know, we're talking about stated cases, but that's what the judge ruled in that stated case. That no matter what, they have to comply with the law, and that's why they can take a different opinion as to whether emissions, etc., should overrule that. But that's the bottom line. From the neighbourhood plan, if Northumbrian Water isn't complying with the law, how can we proceed with these developments? And that's why I mentioned granting conditions, sir. Because if they have plans that are sort of concrete plans, and they can say, we can project that we're going to do this and that and the other, and we're going to get that down and explain how they're going to spend the money, because, as I said, the £15.7 million got nothing to do with Whitburn. How are we going to achieve that? Then we can reconsider. But I don't think it's an onerous duty on the council to monitor what you're going to do, how you're going to get out 10 spills a year.
Thank you, Mr. Latimer.
I apologise if I've got it wrong, but I'd like to say to Mr. Shadow Vivian that his submission and his assumptions are wrong. Is that it's not complex at all. I've just received from Ofwat now Northumbrian Water's business plan. The system was designed to take 35,000 people. 35,000 of the population. We now find they're putting 53,000 in. I've got a meeting next week with Ofwat to discuss that. Now, that's not complex, that's just bad management. And the other thing is that I appreciate what you said about Mr. Shattock, but it proves the council were wrong. And also, the 15.7 million, if you want, I can email it to you, but from Ofwat, the letter from Ofwat, not one penny of the 15.7 million goes into the Whitburn system. The 35,000 to 56,000 is totally wrong. I've just thought of something that in the local plan, what it has to happen is that Whitburn has to comply with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. That's a must. And not just Whitburn, the whole sewerage infrastructure of South Tyneside.
Thank you. I mean, just to remind everyone, the Ofwat or the undertaking to the Ofwat is on the examination website. I'll go back to that in terms of the 15.7 million and what it means. I think I've had submissions from both sides. We're getting to 3:45. I'm afraid I do need a break after an hour and 3/4. We'll carry on the discussion after the break. Is there anything further specifically about the Whitburn issue and policy 10 that people want to bring to my attention before I take the afternoon break? Because I think the matter, Whitburn, Mr. Green.
It's not one I mentioned, which is related, but it's related to NWL as well. But I can mention after the break if need be.
Okay.
Do you want it?
Well, I'm mindful other people in the room may also want a break. It feels to me it's getting quite warm in this room this afternoon.
Can I mention one more thing?
Very briefly, Mr. Latimer.
Is built next to my premises. And I had reassurances from Northumbrian Water what it would do, how it would do it, how many times it would do it. And everything turned out proved to be wrong. And I approached Northumbrian Water and pointed it out. We had a commercial fishing boat. He was picking up sewage debris in the traps and this, that and the other, so we gave up on that. And I was invited to go to meet the chairman of Northumbrian Water. And I went, and I was really shocked because there was more people there than what is here. And at the end, I was offered £5,000 to shut up. And I was totally shocked at that, and that's what's kept me going. But that was in 1997. Now, Northumbrian Water is owned by the richest man in Hong Kong, and their sole purpose is profit. Now, just before Christmas, we have a Boxing Day dip. Just before Christmas that came, you saw the software engineers going into the pumping station. Must have been to try and hold it back. There they were. After the day, Boxing Day, there they are again. Now, you know, I'm just a member of the public, and somehow we've got to get this situation looked into. It isn't just any good saying, you know, we don't agree and this, that and the other, and the planners don't have to do this. The planners have to.
Thank you.
Very small point there. But it was pointed out that Northumbrian Water give extensive evidence to say they've got the capacity. I'd like to point out that the Environment Agency consider Northumbrian Water in breach of the permit at both Whitburn and at Hendon. At Whitburn, there's a compliance assessment report still in existence about an illegal connection they made, and I've just recently found out from the Environment Agency that they're not complying with the permit at Hendon because they're not passing forward sufficient flows in terms of full flow to treatment. Thank you.
That's outside my window.
Thank you. I'm clear on, I'm going to move to the break shortly. What I'm going to say by sort of bringing this discussion point together, and then if people are here only for policy 10, you'd then be able to leave after or during the break. I've heard the respective submissions. I understand the council's position. I'm clear on what Whitburn community and others are looking for in terms of the wording of policy 10. I've got the legal opinion. I've heard from Mr Shadowraven this afternoon in terms of the council's response in terms of some of the practicalities. But I did know it ultimately concluded by, if I was to kind of arrive at my own judgment in terms of what a policy could or could not include, that could be a matter for my post-hearings letter, and we'll move forward on that basis. But I'm going to reflect on, again, what I've heard. I did after the stage 1 hearings. There's a lot of material in front of me. I'm not necessarily now looking for any further submissions, and I'll come to view as part of my post-stage 2 hearing correspondence. I'm now going to take a mid-afternoon adjournment. It's just gone 3:45, but unfortunately, because of the business we've still got to get through, I'd like people back in this room at 4 o'clock, please. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 4 o'clock, so I'm going to resume this hearing session, please. Before we took the mid-afternoon break, we were on policy 10. I'd heard from various representatives from Whitburn who'd made extensive representations on the plan originally, and I followed those through this afternoon in terms of what they're seeking in terms by way of changes to policy 10. Before I move off policy 10, disposal of foul water, I'm going to move on to policy 11. Mr. Green, you're going to have to help me, Mr. Green, in terms of where your original representations are related to this policy. We've discussed it at Fellgates.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's just in relation to NWL. You know, in relation to policy 10, I believe that you know they've been found guilty. So until the 5-year plan for NWL is executed, any further build should be stopped, and the local plans should be put on hold as to such a time.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going on then to policy 11, which is the final policy under item 1. This deals with the protection of water quality, and I'd asked that my MIQs 9.16 and 9.17 whether the policy was justified and effective. Firstly, in seeking to sort of maximise opportunities for nature-based solutions, biodiversity and ecology improvements, and whether part 2 of the policy should be qualified in terms of where it's appropriate and practical to do so.
Thank you, sir. We don't believe that it requires qualification. Part 2 of the policy seeks to maximise opportunities for nature-based solutions, biodiversity and ecology improvements. This approach to water quality management is consistent with the objectives of the European Water Framework Directive, which has been transposed into UK law and retained post-Brexit. So we feel it's fully consistent with a broader framework.
And then in follow-up to that question at 9.17, I'd ask whether policy 11 would be an effective approach to ensuring the appropriate provision of necessary infrastructure and measures to protect water quality, having regard to a particular paragraph 185 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Again, if I can turn to the Council for their views on this, please.
We consider that policy 11 forms part of an effective approach to ensuring appropriate provision of necessary infrastructure and measures to protect water quality, and to ensure that development proposals consider the likely effects of pollution on health, living conditions and the natural environment. Other relevant policies include policy 1, promoting healthy communities, and policy 3, pollution, and cross-reference to MIQ 9.14 on the latter one. The water should be discharged in an appropriate way. Water courses are sensitive and discharges can have harmful impacts. Consequently, part 1 of the policy seeks to set out criteria to manage the possible discharge into a watercourse by requiring proposals to incorporate appropriate water pollution control measures. And given the importance of watercourses, it's appropriate to make criteria for the impact of discharge and pollutants potentially entering a watercourse. National guidance states when a detailed assessment is needed, the components are likely to include how the proposed development will affect measures in the river basement management plan to achieve good status in water bodies, to ensure local authorities discharge their duty, to have regard to river basin management plans when exercising their duties, including making planning decisions. And this has been reflected in part 1 of the policy, Roman italic 4. I've already dealt with the nature-based solutions point. the level 1 SFRA states development planning should always be aware of the requirement to not develop within 8 metres of any watercourse, flood defence structure or culvert, or within 16 metres on a tidal river which is likely to be a regulated flood risk activity under Schedule 25 of the Environment Permitting England and Wales Regulations 2016. This is also set out within national guidance, and Part 3 of the policy integrates this into the local plan. National policy states that SUDS provides benefits for water quantity, water quality, biodiversity and amenity, known as the 4 pillars of SUDS, and this has been integrated into the local plan as part 4 of the policy. The Northumbrian River Basin Management Plan, which covers South Tyneside, states some of the most important habitats and species are specially protected, including through designation as sites of special scientific interest and habitat sites. Many of these sites are reliant on having enough and suitable water quality to sustain their special habitats and species. However, many may have become isolated by, and in some cases, their ecology damaged or threatened by land and water use and other uses such as invasive, non-native species. These pressures can act directly on the sites or within their wider catchments. Part 5 of the policy acknowledges the need to protect dependent sites of special scientific interest and European sites. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Latimer, please.
That's very interesting to hear that, because we have a special scientific area where we are at Whitburn. And recently, I contacted the Environment Agency to inquire about the testing of the water below where I live, which is the most closest to the outfall. And they came back and said, Whitburn is not a bathing water, so the Environment Agency tell us not up to them to test the seawater below our premises. Ask the council. So I asked the council, which I got a reply on the 5th of December. We do not have any test results carried out by the council at the location provided. So it means you've never ever tested it. Now, when we got a discharge, you know, I'm 82-year-old. When I was 5-year-old, we used to go and play in the rock pools, which all the lads did, and it was great. The place was alive with shellfish and sea life and everything. That's what we get today. Now, you know, you're thinking that's adequate. But also, when I look out of my window, that's what I get on the lamppost outside. Mussels and winkles taken from this beach between the 1st of April and 31st of August may be contaminated and should not be eaten. For further information, contact Community Services, South Tyneside. So, you know, this has been going on since 1996 when it was commissioned, and the council have done nothing. And, you know, it's just ruining all the seashore. People write to me and say, where's all the sea life going? The rock pools are just dead. And, you know, at one time when I was young, you'd walk along there, the water was so clear, you could look down, the crabs and the little fish, the seaweed, it's all gone. And so it doesn't live up to what you're saying.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of this policy, policy 11, the way I was reading it is that it's largely relating to kind of non-marine watercourses, water bodies, but should it be read more widely, as certainly the final part 5 of the policy would also apply to, I think Mr. Latimer's referring to, obviously we've got the European protected habitats off the coast at Whitburn, which will be SSSIs and beneath the European habitat. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. We don't have any marine life, so it's working out well.
Mr. Clifford.
Sir, could I come back to you on that one?
Thank you. I mean, I will just note for the examination, the council did, as one of my various action points, look at the habitat regulations assessments. So there is an update addendum to that document in relation to this. Mr. Lavelle.
Indeed, touching on paragraph 5, development will not be permitted where it would have an adverse impact on water, depending on sites of special scientific interest. How do we know? How can we tell it's not having an adverse impact? The EA only test between May and September, right? And they tend to test, in my research, in fair weather conditions. They don't test after discharges. There's been some, shall we say, citizen science done, and I've got results here. I'll just touch upon them. I don't particularly, unless you want me to send you a copy, I don't particularly want to bother you with this at this time, but we've had some citizen science done, and basically it tells us that there's, after 3 months after discharge, there's still adverse levels of E. coli spores in the water. Right? And this is a guy, he's a vet, and what he says also, and it hasn't been validated, and I haven't had a chance to look through his research, he's telling me that when there are discharges, he has more clients coming to his surgery for medication for the dogs who have sickness and diarrhea. And allied to that, there's a notable case at Cutthroat Dean, which forms part of South Tyneside, when a dog actually died in Northumberland Water. I think they came to some sort of agreement with the owner and paid for the vet bills. But going back to that, I don't think it's effective enough, sir, in as much as there's no way to measure it.
Thank you. Did the council want to come back on policy 11 or wait?
Yeah, no, I'll come back on it now. Just looking at the, just to contextualise paragraph 5 of the policy. Yeah, just bear with me for a second. Can you just pass me that paragraph again? So I'm looking at the supporting text here, and it's paragraph 7.63. The Council will support the aims of the Water Framework Directive to protect and enhance the quality of the borough's surface freshwater areas, rivers, wetlands, groundwater, and to achieve good ecological status in all water bodies, including surface, ground and coastal waters. And, this is important, prevent any deterioration from the current status as echoed in the Northumbrian River Basin Management Plan. So it includes surface, ground and coastal waters.
Thank you. Are there any further points people wish to make on policy 11? Mr. Green.
Just the point that the council made, 9.6, the level 1 SF4A 2022 states development planning should always be aware of the requirement to not develop within 8 metres of any water courses, flood defences, structures or culverts, and I believe that applies in SP8's case, because there is already some flood defences, there's SUDs already in there, and I'm just wondering how the plan relates to that.
I mean, the plan, I think we're going to end up doing the council's job here, but the plan as a document should be read as a whole, so all the policies in the plan, policy SP8 or any other policy that relates to specific allocation does not have to repeat other parts of the plan. So if there's a policy requirement here in, say, policy 11 or somewhere else, it applies where it's relevant to policy SP8.
Yes, sir, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to draw the water element of this afternoon session to a close. Again, plenty for me to think about. If people are here just for the water element, you may now go if you so choose. I'm going to move on to the climate change part of the agenda, which is issue 1. It's 4:15. We're going to see how far we get. but it may be that this is an area of discussion that may tip over into another session. I'm just mindful, I started at 9:30 this morning. I'm going to admit I probably can't go beyond 5:30. Judge of that what you will about inspector productivity. I'm pleading on your compassion. So we'll see how far we get. If that's, I assume I'm going to look at a net in terms of, are we potentially okay in this room to about 5:30? Does anybody have any particular time constraints or considerations I need to be aware of and would want to be kind of heard first out of sequence and then allowed to go? No.
Friday morning.
Okay, so we're continuing under matter 7, but I can't help but notice more people have joined us from the council's team. Just for the benefit of for myself, other people in the room, and for the recording, can the people who've joined the council's teams perhaps just briefly identify or introduce themselves for to the room, please?
Okay, Deborah Lamb, Operations Manager for the Spatial Plan Team, South Tyneside Council.
Yep, Rhiannon Laverick, I'm one of the Planning Policy Officers at South Tyneside Council.
David Newham, CP Viability, undertaking the viability testing for the council.
Michael Vasey, Senior Carbon Reduction and Sustainability Officer for the council.
Okay, so under issue 1, in terms of meeting the challenge of climate change, obviously this is a priority for a number of authorities across the country, and national planning policy seeks to achieve, the fast and significant reduction in carbon emissions. There's obviously a policy framework within the plan that seeks to do this. The strategic policy is set out at SP 15 and then is supported by policy 5 in terms of reducing carbon consumption and carbon emissions. I think my first question under my MIQ 9.1 is how these what are these plans seeking in terms of what the plan itself can do in terms of contributing to climate emission reductions? And is it through the policies, is it expecting that developments will meet current or future building regulations, which is likely to include the Future Home Standard potentially later this year? Or is the policy expecting something more, so that for development to exceed building regulations? Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, obviously the policy works to kind of battle the conflicting issues of both protecting the environment and addressing the challenges of climate change, but also working to meet the growth and housing infrastructure needs that the plan requires. Any developments that were compliant with building regulations would be policy compliant in this case. but the council would be supportive of any developments that wanted to go further in terms of climate change as well.
Thank you. And when the council's saying it's sort of seeking compliance with the building regulations, that's also with an eye on, as I indicated earlier, things look like they're going to change this year in terms of the introduction of the higher future home standard.
Yeah, so the council are aware that building regulations can change quite frequently, so the policy isn't overly prescriptive because of that, because it doesn't want to become sort of out of date too quickly. But yes, it has taken into consideration the future home standard, and it's mentioned in the supporting text of the policy.
Thank you. And perhaps a question for Mr. Newham, something I get at many plan examinations. What will be the kind of cost implications of future home standards? Is that something that your work has considered in terms of construction costs?
Yes is the short answer. It has considered it. There's 2 points I want to make around this. So the first is that I don't think it's just a cost. I don't think future home standards is simply a cost that comes out of the viability appraisals. We've been quite consistent on that. So in PRE 25, which is the 2021 viability testing, we raised that. We made the comment that actually in reality, when building regulations change, and if it's in this instance an improvement in energy efficiency, which is a benefit to a purchaser, that actually has a value impact on the dwelling. So the first port of call for a developer is to pass over that cost to the house purchaser. So it's not simply just a case of adding a cost. And you don't have to just trust me on that. If you look at the Future Home Standard Impact Assessment, which was the government consultation on this from December 2023, they actually discuss that principle. They talk about costs being passed over by developers to landowners as well as house purchasers. So that's in that publicly available document. I'm just trying to scrabble around to find the reference for you to make it easy. I think it's paragraph 6.11 of the Future Home Standard Impact Assessment from December 2023. So I think that's worth having a look at. It's useful. We've commented on that in passing in our viability evidence, but I think that's useful for your general consideration. So that's point one. Point two is about, notwithstanding my concern about this just being a cost, if there is an element of cost to be factored into the viability testing, what that figure should be. So just to be clear, in our 2021 initial viability testing, we did make an allowance for the interim standard at that time, which was £2,500 per dwelling. I must have been feeling pretty kind at that time to include that. So we have got a cost in there, notwithstanding my comments in that report to say, I don't think this is just a cost. I've factored it in for the reasons I discussed this morning. And for those of you who weren't necessarily in the session, what we have to do in viability testing is to adopt a cautious approach, which is what we've done here. So there was an original allowance of 2,500 for the interim standard. In the 2023 testing and the subsequent most recent 2025 viability testing, that allowance is actually higher. It's actually £5,000 per dwelling. So there is again a cost in there, notwithstanding my comments that I'm very sceptical about this just being a cost to a developer. The sort of supplementary point to make on that is if you look at the Future Home Standard Impact Assessment, again, so this is the December 2023, which I've just referred to, paragraph 6.16 says the cost difference between 2021 standards and future home standards is £4,360 per unit, and it also says that cost, due to economies of scale over time will come down in the medium to long term. So it's saying that, yes, in theory, there's a cost of £4,360 per unit. It also talks about how that cost could be offset through passing that on to the purchaser, but it also says that cost will come down over time anyway for economies of scale. So long and the short of it is, I think the approach we've adopted is appropriate. I don't think any additional cost should be factored into the viability modelling.
If I can bring in from the Home Builders Federation then Mr. Martin. I think there were two, sort of starting from the perspective of kind of clarity of policy in terms of what the council's seeking, because I think that was a theme that was identified through representations, and then I've introduced the issue of viability on this particular point. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. You'll be aware, sir, that the steer from government very much from the written ministerial statement in December 2023 is councils, or when they're doing a local plans, ought to be following building regulations. So there's a consistency across the country. So our members aren't faced with 300 different standards in different authorities. So there's a good reason behind that, and obviously it's something that the government are intending to bring through with the next iteration of the MPPF, which is under consultation at the moment. So there's a clear direction of travel there. And I'm pleased that the council have said, and I know it's in the hearing statement as well, that if you're compliant with building regs, you're compliant with this policy. But the policy does seem to go somewhat beyond what the current building regulations are, because it talks about embodied carbon, sustainable materials, use of material derived from excavation and demolition. These are things that sort of sit outside of Part L, and I don't think they should be included. What's more, there's no definitive guidance in there as to what standard that's being benchmarked against. And if they are included, I can't see anywhere in the viability that they've been costed in any way, which is a concern, because when my members, when they get to a planning application stage, that creates a huge amount of uncertainty as actually what they're meant to be doing to address that policy. Do you want me to go on to the Future Homes stuff as well? So yeah, the Future Homes information, as an organisation, we work with another organisation called Future Homes Hub, the Future Homes Hub, which is an organisation which is there to aid the house building industry to get towards net zero. They estimated the costs of moving to Future Home standards as between, I think, £5,000 and £10,000 per plot. I understand Mr. Newham's point there about there may well be some sort of premium attached to a house that meets Future Home standards, albeit it will be a mandatory standard anyway, so the differentiation may not be quite as stark. There's also some unknown as to whether the cost of Future Home standards could be entirely recouped through the price of a house or the return for the landowner, especially if you're dealing in a market like South Tyneside, which has areas where viability is really squeezed. There isn't going to be much opportunity for house builders to increase prices to take into account those types of costs, because there's only so much price increase that a market will bear before houses just become too unaffordable for the average person in the area to be able to afford. I am a little bit surprised that there is no real assumption for Future Home standards. I know Mr. Newham talks about some of the assumptions he's made, but I think they were for the interim Part L standards, not the Future Home standards, which the Future Home standards would be on top of that. I've been in a couple of other examinations recently, Sheffield and Central Lancashire, and their viability appraisals do assume an amount, usually between 5,000 and 10,000 for Future Homes standards. So I am a little bit surprised, given that it's going to be coming in very soon, and it will be in over the plan period. It should be accounted for.
Do you want to respond to that final point, Mr. Newham?
Just very, very quickly again, just to say that Mr. Martin is assuming that's a cost and there's no recovery of value. So that's what he was saying in his 5,000 to 10,000. And just to make the point that in the Part L allowance, the interim standard, which was upped in our modelling to £5,000 per dwelling, when you go to what that actually means, the original, so it's an uplift of a cost compared to a base position, and this is talked about in the future home standards, it is in there, and the base position is a gas boiler property with solar panels. That's the base assumption, and then they say, well, my understanding base, and I haven't seen the evidence is referred to at 5 to 10 grand. The standard, the future home standard impact assessment says £4,360 per unit. It's the average increase above a base product that has a gas boiler. Now, our £5,000 per dwelling allowance assumed effectively an air source heat pump has been put into the property, which I would say is pretty standard now for new build housing and has been for a few years. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is our allowance goes way above and beyond the interim standard, which was 31% energy efficiency. Future home standard has talked about 75 to 80% efficiency compared to this gas boiler and solar panel base position. So that's all I'd say. I think my view very strongly is that we've covered this off. And if we add any more costs in, I think it's an unnecessary burden on the viability.
Mr. Martin, very briefly.
Yeah, I don't dispute Mr. Newham's point about some of that uplift in the cost being recaptured. I'm just sceptical actually how much of it will be recaptured. That's all.
Thank you. And can I invite the council to come back on, I think, the first point that Mr. Martin raised in terms of clarity about whether the policy is going beyond current building regulations in relation to some of its requirements, and whether clarity is needed in terms of what the council will do, how it will benchmark that.
Yeah, so Policy 5 in particular does go into a few ways that we would like to see development sort of really prioritising sustainable design and carbon reduction measures, but it does also say that it's as far as possible. So, you know, where it isn't possible for developers to do so, we're happy to kind of listen to that and see what they have to say, but we are actively encouraging developers to incorporate sustainable design.
Mr. Martin, very briefly, and then I'll hear from others.
Yeah, it's just as far as possible is not really very, because that leads to basically, I guess, a subjective judgment from whoever the planning officer is dealing with that planning application, and I'm worried about a lack of consistency there in decision making.
Thank you. Councillor Herbert next, please.
When I looked at the questions you presented, I decided to look at the Local Government Association website, and it's got a lot of guidance on there for people to look at, and it says that produce a guide that's intended to help planners and politicians to play their full part in tackling climate change. Now, the LGA, I would think, are the experts on all things local government, so it's an authoritative body passing guidance on to various people within councils, including the likes of myself as a councillor. So they have produced several documents, several reports, and one is by the Royal Town Planning Institute. It's called The Climate Crisis, a guide for LAs, local authorities, in planning for climate change. I'm going to quote a few things from that report. So, unlike many other planning objectives, planning authorities have a legal obligation to consider climate mitigation in plan making. So it's a higher standard than most planning rules. Local development plans need to show how reductions within their direct control or influence will be achieved in line with national targets. So that's national targets under the Climate Change Act, which show a graduating reduction to net zero over time. So The reductions in the local authorities' climate reduction, carbon reduction, should follow that trajectory, in my mind, or better. This is emphasised in National Policy Planning Framework, NPPF, paragraphs 161, 162 and footnote 61, which requires plans to contribute to radical reductions, radical, which doesn't mean just like normal, in greenhouse gases, and take a proactive approach to mitigating and adapting to climate. Now, a proactive approach means you lead, to me. You don't just say to developers, well, if you fancy doing it, do it. And we'd support you. No, there needs to be something more positive than that, more proactive. There's also no doubt that carbon dioxide emissions are a material consideration in planning decision making. This was given additional clarity in December 2024 on the update of the NPPF, which now states that the need to mitigate and adapt to climate change should also be considered in preparing and assessing planning applications, taking into account the full range of potential climate change impacts, the full range. Not just what might come from a house, heating a house, the full range of what the planning decision results in. So it recommends that local planning authorities should adopt the following principles. Ensure that there is comprehensive, relevant evidence base on climate mitigation and carbon implications of development. So it's looking for the planning department or the council to get evidence in what their planning decisions might result in. So it could be the amount of carbon that's produced and effects upon the overall borough carbon footprint. Use this evidence to assess options and then develop policies that are consistent with achieving carbon reduction targets. So use that evidence then to look at various options to see which is the most advantageous as regard climate change. Ensure that requirements placed upon development are clear, on developers are clear and precise wherever possible. So saying that if you're going to have developers, you need to tell them what you want. And it needs to be concise. Evidence should test different spatial development and policy options for their potential to contribute to carbon emission reductions. This should include a range of policy areas, and considerations include transport, so that's implications of location and travel behaviour, buildings, both operational and embodied carbon, energy, the reducing demand and decarbonising supply, infrastructure, the carbon implications of infrastructure required necessary to support the development, and look at nature-based solutions and carbon sequestration and storage. So they recommend a report that Greater Cambridge Council commissioned. That was a Greater Cambridge Net Zero Carbon Evidence Base. It's also included on the local government website. And they commissioned consultants to provide a local plan net zero carbon evidence-based report. So they actually came up with policies that recommended the following: that all buildings should be net zero carbon. All dwellings should achieve a space heating demand of 15 to 20 kilowatt hour per metre squared per year. New renewable energy should be generated on site at all new developments. Should support zero emission transport. Set requirements for planning proposals to adequately assess carbon impacts to ensure compliance with the overarching strategy of reduced carbon emissions. Now, in that report, they actually looked at different spatial positioning of developments and looked at intensification of in urban areas, transport corridors being used, green belt on the edge of towns, non-green belt area on the edge of towns, new settlements, village building, and looked at how that would affect the overall carbon reduction. I found that by far the worst was actually village developments, by far and away, and the best was intensified areas within built-up urban areas. So this is what really, by just using the building regulations and just what comes out of a building isn't enough. You've got to look at what the transport effects are, what's embodied within the building itself, to get the full carbon, some of you like full carbon measures that you need. So
Shall I?
I just asked that the policy would be reviewed to follow this guidance. So it's clearly evident that this is what is best practice. And you talk about a council that has declared a climate emergency, or one that's signed up the UK 100 local authorities, which has made a pledge to have zero carbon in their own operations by 2030, and across the borough, zero carbon by 2045. Now, by allowing buildings to be built, even with the future home standard, there still will be carbon emissions. So you're going to have to retrofit those to, if you're going to run it down the line, get to zero carbon. So why don't you bring that forward now? They talk about the cost, £5,000 for future building standards, and a £150,000 house, that's 3.3%. On a mortgage over 25 years, it's not a great deal of expenditure to a homeowner who will reap the benefits of very much lower heating costs and a much more healthier environment. Some of the policies that said that even you don't connect to the gas grid anymore, there you'll save a standing charge throughout the year because you're not connected to the gas, year in, year out, of £200, £300. The government are going, blowing trumpets about saving £150 a year. So if one simple task, one simple action would double what they actually promised homeowners in that place. I think we'll get a lot of support from people who want to buy these houses.
Thank you. Mr. Green, again, I'm struggling to think where your representation, but
yeah, it's just clarification on a point, sir. You refer to future home standards, or better, but there's a response to one of the questions where the developer's saying, given the continued uncertainty regarding timescales for the implication of the proposed future home standard, the wording of policies SP15 and 5 should not be amended to include reference to compliance with this standard. Now that's worrying because the council is saying that it has to be complied with, and I just want to clarify that it's because it should be a necessity to at least comply with the future home standard.
thank you. I mean, I think from what I'm here, Councillor Herbert.
So the point was raised about, we'll let the developer decide if they'll do it. Well, none of them are going to do it. The first one that breaks ranks is going to be not very popular, most developers, I think. But if you make a level playing field across a borough where they've all got to do it, then they're all in the same boat. So we get that consistency then that's been asked for.
I think, if I can sort of summarise from Councillor Herbert, I think you're seeking higher standards through this plan. Then the point about whether future home standards will be mandatory. I'm fairly clear from the council's position, and it's from its policy, is it is seeking compliance with the building regulations. But if a developer or a development comes forward that wants to do something innovative or exceed those standards, it's going to find support through this policy, but you're not necessarily requiring developments to do that. I think Mr. Martin has referred to already the written ministerial statement. I mean, did the council, as part of plan making, think about whether it could have set higher standards, or was there an initial kind of evidence that would indicate that that might be challenging at this moment in time, either from a viability or a deliverability perspective?
So we have introduced the requirement for a sustainability statement from all major developments, which will hopefully, well, it will clarify how sustainability has been considered through the development process, particularly on the larger developments where they will have the more significant impacts towards achieving sustainable development and progress towards the climate change ambitions of the council. And also the individual policies which relate to the larger developments also do contain their own sort of considerations for sustainable design.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, sir. I was wanting to discuss natural assets and regarding the emission reduction. Is this the point to mention that, or would that be further along? Okay, thank you. Retention of mature trees, hedgerows and greenbelt mitigate climate change as they are all carbon capturing and storing assets. In a context where national environmental targets are being missed, policies that allow the loss of carbon capturing sinks are unjustified and unsound. Permitting such sites that will require carbon storage asset loss and removal is a reactive and regressive approach, contrary to the proactive duty set out in the MPPF. Destroying these assets for development, especially where alternatives are scarce, worsens climate vulnerability and accelerates biodiversity loss rather than reversing it. Climate policy and nature recovery frameworks are not about offsetting loss. They require avoidance first, then mitigation, and only then compensation. The local nature recovery strategies across Gateshead, South Tyneside and Sunderland are intended to restore nature at scale and must guide land use decisions and not be ignored. The NPPF paragraph 161 states the planned system should support the transition to net zero, taking full account of all climate impacts. Replacement planting is not mitigation in the short to medium term, and we are in the midst of a climate emergency where action today needs to happen. We've heard the Office of Environmental Protection have issues concerning reports about sewage issues. Yesterday the news reported the OEP have given a damning report on our own government. Legally binding targets regards the Environment Act 2021 will be missed for 2030. We should all be alarmed by this. Locally, we here today can shape a stronger local plan. The climate emergency must be at the heart of every decision. The local plan that puts forward sites that, to be viable, will see mature tree and hedge loss is actively undermining net zero requirements by the MPPF. How can this plan be found sound when it permits the removal of existing carbon sequestering infrastructure at a time when the UK is already failing to meet legally binding climate and environmental targets? Imposing impossible national development demands on this town during a climate emergency risks irreversible harm and fundamentally undermines society's responsibility to protect the place we live. I propose a modification, a wording change. Change the wording on site-specific recommendations for developers from should retain existing mature trees to must retain existing mature trees and hedgerows if designs feasibly allow, or take out if designs feasibly allow and use unless no viable design layout alternatives are available. As the current recommendations have had no impact, we've seen this on lots of sites such as the Holborn Field, South Tyneside College, Hebburn College. There's lots of areas where the mature trees have been felled for the designs, when I think a bit more of a softer approach to designs could have retained a lot more of the trees, and I think that's really vital to help us reach them targets. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just trying to get my bearings. I think I hear it now and I understand there's kind of, when you look at climate change, it can encompass a variety of issues. We've obviously got open space, natural environment next week, policy 36, so maybe something we come back to as part of that discussion as well, but made a note of that. Just coming back to the approach to reducing carbon emissions, still on my MIQ 9.1, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. It was a point actually more to do with, 9.5, 9.6, so I can wait until then. I wasn't sure where we were on the agenda,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay. In terms of just finally under MIQ 9.1 and policy SP15, the Council, through its hearing statement at the end, has said it wishes to kind of add in some additional text around the use of good design to specifically reduce reliance on mechanical ventilation and cooling systems, the kind of heat island effect. Is it Ms. Laverick?
Yeah, so in response to some of the representations that we received during the Reg 19 consultation, we did feel it was appropriate to add some further wording that would help encourage the reduction of reliance on mechanical ventilation and cooling systems. So we have proposed a set of texts that would go in the supporting text of the policy.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, is it on this point?
It is, yeah. I don't necessarily quibble that wording. I would query, however, that things relating to overheating are covered in Part O of the building regulations, and I would query as to whether they need to be replicated in planning policy. Part O, as you'll be aware, sir, does talk about taking into account things like solar gain and things like that as a first pass to avoid overheating of developments.
Thank you. I mean, it is put forward as part of the supporting text rather than a policy requirement. Does that overcome your concern, Mr. Martin?
I just think it's unnecessary, sir, but it's obviously your call.
From MIQ 9.1. So, the second item under this agenda is through policy, I think it's policy 5, the Council's referring to sustainability, a sustainability statement being sought particularly on major development proposals that would address a variety of issues. And then it says at the bottom of the policy at part 4, where it's not possible to meet these standards, is the Council clear on what those standards are?
Yes, so in our response to the MIQ, we did acknowledge that the wording was a little bit confusing. So we have proposed to delete where it says to demonstrate compelling reasons, because it isn't looking to introduce new local standards. It was merely trying to refer to the other points of the policy that had already been laid out.
I just wonder if part of the issue is the word standards is in itself can kind of may inadvertently mean other things. We've kind of referred to the future home standards. There could be other things, whether they are actually technically standards or whether it's an objective. So whether a further modification in relation just to the word of use standards, whether there's an alternative to try and provide some clarity for this policy.
Yeah, I think it was something that we had discussed, potentially changing it to say requirements instead, that would hopefully then remove that confusion. So I think that is something we'd be happy to propose as a modification as well.
Thank you. Now, I know there are concerns about sustainability statement and what it's going to achieve. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. Just to say, I'd agree that the use of the word standards is a bit difficult because it would indicate there is some sort of document that you're supposed to refer to. So I think objectives would be something we would support on that for clarity, albeit I would return to my point that there isn't, it seems to be a rather subjective matter as to whether you pass those criteria or not, rather than saying you have to do X. You know, it becomes then, I guess, discretion of the development management planning officer, and my worry is about the consistency there, but I've already raised that point. In terms of sustainability statement, at the moment the policy requires all major developments to have a sustainability statement. I do wonder whether that's appropriate, given that a major development could be a Section 73, it could be a change of use, it could be a piece of infrastructure where a sustainability statement may not necessarily be appropriate. So I wonder whether the wording on that needs to be clarified. My submission through the hearing statement is actually, is the local plan at all the best place for that, and shouldn't it be in the local validation list where the council can be more specific about which instances it requires a sustainability statement. I'm a little bit confused that if it's building regulations that we're working to, what a sustainability statement would actually be telling us, because that's mandatory anyway.
Thank you. If I can come back to the council in terms of what it's seeking to achieve through the sustainability statement process, please.
Yeah, so we would be using it as a tool for our development management officers mainly to be able to see exactly how the developers and their proposals are responding to climate change. We would expect it to be proportional to the scale of development that is proposed. So, you know, some of the examples, like you said, we aren't expecting unnecessary wording to be included. It's basically, we're hoping to ensure that sustainability is being actively considered throughout the design process and isn't just being left as a last minute sort of add-on, and that we do believe it could deliver significant impacts towards achieving sustainable development in the borough. And the requirements for the sustainability statement are laid out within the policy as well.
Thank you. And does the council have a view on the alternative that's been put to me as part of this hearing, that the council could address this through the local validation list, through your local list requirements?
So it already is part of our local validation requirements, but this would just improve the quality of them, hopefully.
Thank you. If I can hear from us, Councillor Herbert next, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the statement's going to actually achieve. If you're not benchmarking it against standards, what you want them to do, they could say, oh, well, we could do anything, really. We can have a pond in the front garden. So really it needs to have some sort of process to validate it, so it can actually bring about significant impacts on climate change, as they're hoping to do, but that's just a wish, not actual trying to achieve something.
Thank you. Is there anything further Council wishes to add in relation to the sustainability statement issue under my MIQ 9.2? No. We've covered to some extent my MIQ 9.3. I'd raise the issue around the future home standard and how it's been considered as part of the viability work, and I've had various exchanges on that. Is there anything further people wish to add at this point, Mr. Martin?
I don't know if this is the right point, but I know you've raised the issue about electric vehicle charging. I don't think it's necessary to have a policy on that, given again it's covered by Part S of the building regulations, and that's what the council should be working to.
Yes, I had raised that on my MOQ 9.6 and policy 5, so we'll come on to that shortly. But is there anything further on my MIQ 9.3? No, shake of the head. I asked at MIQ 9.4, it's my item D on item 2, around renewable energy projects and the green belt. I think this has been stimulated by a particular proposal that people had in mind when they're probably making representations, whether it would be necessary for plan soundness within policy SP15 to include any additional policy content in terms of the very special circumstances in relation to renewable energy proposals would they to come forward. And I thought I followed that with my question whether that's just going to sail too close to what's already in national planning. Just repeat what's in national planning policy.
It's unnecessary. The supporting text refers to it anyway, and confirms that.
Thank you. And then as I see the council's put forward at paragraph 9.4, I think a modification in terms of the supporting text. So I'll look at that in terms of whether I think it's necessary for soundness, or whether it's a clarification that the council or the plan could do anyway without necessarily being consulted on. In terms of, we've touched upon this briefly, but in terms of alternative approaches, I heard earlier from Councillor Herbert in terms of the Green Party's submission. I think the plan should go further and more rigorously in terms of setting higher carbon reduction targets, and the Council set out its response. I've referred to previously the written ministerial statement, which provides a degree of caution around doing that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not permissible, but there are certain high thresholds to kind of go through in terms of setting that policy. Councillor Herbert, was there anything further you wanted to add in relation to it? Was my MIQ 9.5?
Right, also produced by the Local Government Association is a document produced by the Royal Town Planning Institute and the Town and County Planning Association. And it talks about this written parliamentary statement in a bit of detail. So it's quite a bit of stuff that they've written about it. So they say that the legal duty on planning and climate Schedule 7 in brackets 15C of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 amends the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, provides that the local plan must be designed to secure that the use and development of land in the local planning authority area contribute to the mitigation of and adaptation of climate change. The Planning and Energy Act 2008, which provides powers for local authorities to require a proportion of the energy need related to new development to be sourced in the locality of the development through renewable or low carbon generation. It also sets out powers for local planning authorities to set energy efficient standards that exceed the energy requirements of the building regulations. This talks about Schedule 7, also of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, which amends Section 19 of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act, contains a duty on plan making to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Now it talks about a court case that was brought regarding the written statement, which said the appellant says it sought to unlawfully restrict the powers given to local authorities by the Planning and Energy Act. However, the Court of Appeal dismissed the claim and maintained that the written statement represents a sound interpretation of legislation by setting the parameters under which the government expects the legislation to be applied, namely that the Local Planning Act is able to set local standards up to the level of the draft Future Homes Standard. And at the time of writing this, you know, it was a subject of a challenge at the Supreme Court. I don't know if that's been decided yet. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, through amending Section 19 of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act, places a duty on local authorities to ensure the development plan is designed to secure that the use and development of the land in the local planning authority area contribute to the mitigation and adaptation of climate change. This duty on plan making should be interpreted as ensuring the plan aligns with the carbon budget set through the climate legislation. So it's saying it must follow that trajectory set out in the Climate Change Act. So there are important policy levers in the NPPF that justify net zero building policies, including paragraph 161, which states that the planning system should support transition to net zero by 2050 and contribute to radical reductions, as I said before, on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the Court of Appeal says acknowledged that the written statement must therefore be understood only as material consideration for plan making, which does not override the legal obligation on planning authorities to address climate change. It cannot be interpreted as an absolute direction on the way the local policies must be expressed if evidence demonstrates and justifies a better approach. I think the climate crisis we're in now actually demonstrates that we must be taking better approaches to achieve zero carbon. And it talks about a legal opinion that was obtained from Alex Shattock and Landmark Chambers to explain how the judgment impacts on the preparation of policies in developing plan documents that seek to impose standards that exceed the requirements of the building regulations and or the draft Future Home Standard. In this opinion, he stated that, in summary, my advice is that notwithstanding the firm wording in the national policy, there's nothing in law that prevents local authorities from going beyond current or planned building regulations, development plan documents, or adopting different energy efficiency metrics to those set out in the national policy. So it's saying they can actually adopt their own policies. And the Court of Appeal helpfully confirmed as much later on. This interpretation of the Minister's written statement is consistent with recent examination of a Salt Cross Area Action Plan in West Oxfordshire and the Winchester District Local Plan, where the inspectors found that the net zero carbon development policies, although not aligned with the written statement, could be found sound in the context of policy and legislative requirements to support the transition to net zero in line with the Climate Change Act 2008. Planning authorities should therefore continue to develop policy based on robust carbon-literate evidence. If this evidence justifies a diversion from the policy referred to in the written statement, there is space for local authorities to do this if their position is justified by the evidence. In addition, the 2023 statement has been interpreted by the court as being an interim policy intended to bridge the gap before the Future Home Standard comes into force. Good practice for plan making, despite the challenging policy context outlined above, there is still policy opportunities for local planning authorities to set high standards for new buildings, which reduce their operational carbon emissions. These sit broadly under three categories, so I'll not go through it, but it's to set targets for energy-based metrics to achieve net zero emissions, set absolute energy metrics expressed as energy use intensity and space heating and demand for new buildings. So they can actually set these standards and That written statement doesn't prevent them from doing so. And it says where circumstances would support that. Well, the circumstances here, we've got a council that's pledged to reach zero carbon across the borough by 2045, and they're bringing in policies that are not going to achieve that pledge. So I think that's not very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I think follows on, Councillor Herbert, from what you were saying earlier in terms of seeking the modification for the plan to contain more an alternative approach to seeking net zero developments. I hear briefly from Mr. Martin, I think, on this point, please.
Thank you, sir. The house building industry generally is trying to move towards net zero. The reason why we're going with the written ministerial statement is it provides a consistency and a clear path towards net zero through the government's aim to get there by 2050. My worry is that you end up, if each local planning authority can set their own standards, you end up just with a patchwork of different standards, people going at different paces, and it really affects delivery of housing because it makes it much more expensive to deliver housing, because you might end up having to build a certain standard somewhere and then a completely different standard elsewhere. The written ministerial statement is important for that consistency point, and as things ramp up towards a net zero. So I don't disagree with Councillor Herbert's point that it's important that the local plan addresses climate change, but it needs to be done in a coordinated, a rational sort of way. And that's why we would strongly urge to adhere to the written ministerial statement and what the Minister said. That it's also worth highlighting again, that is going to become stronger, more likely through the MPPF that's out for consultation now, where the government is very clear you should be sticking to national standards. I know limited weight can be given to that document at this time, but it does show a clear direction of travel and a clear intention from the government on that.
Thank you. Mindful of time, but is it a brief point, Councillor Herbert?
Just to say that things are evolving nice and slowly and nice pace. But recently there's been a national briefing by several experts across several areas, scientists, defence people, telling us that time is running out rapidly to do things. And if you drag your feet, in the long term, all of us are going to pay dearly. So homeowners are going to find they're paying dearly as well, because of the catastrophic effects on society, economy, people's lives, food, weather, you name it. It's going to have drastic effects. And their warning is to us is to act quickly. And here's a chance for local authority, with other local authorities that are doing this, to follow their example and do the right thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on in terms of the agenda. It's still on the issue of climate change. Mr. Martin referred earlier to building regulations and electrical vehicle charging points. My reading of Policy 5 is this wasn't something that was necessarily picked up by the policy as submitted. Obviously, building regulations have picked up this issue, so therefore invite the council, is any further change needed to Policy 5 in relation to electric vehicle charging points? Now that is it all new housing needs to provide them anyway?
Yeah, so we would agree that obviously Part S, which became valid in June 2022, does mean that EV charging points are now required, and that this point isn't necessary for Policy 5 to be deemed sound.
So EV charge points are going to be standard in every house?
It's been part of the building regulations for is it about 2 or 3 years now.
Right.
Yeah. We're going to move on, see how far we can get. We may not get beyond this next question. Policy 5 also refers to development meeting the highest national standard for water efficiency. There are obviously optional technical standards around the amount of water consumed. And my question to the council at MIQ 9.7 is, when it refers to that highest national standard, is that the excuse me, the optional standard of 110 litres per person per day, and is there the evidence, particularly as South Tyneside, a water stressed area, that justifies the introduction of that optional standard?
Yeah, just to confirm that South Tyneside is not an area of water stress and not recognised by the Environment Agency as being so. The policy basically does sort of set out, well, it is intended that the water efficiency standards that are meant by the policy are the building regulations, so it would be the optional 110 LPPPD that would be supported if a development proposal wanted to move to the highest national standards.
Thank you. Just to clarify with the council, when I look at part 1 of the policy, so this is something you are seeking through. I mean, it says where applicable, it will be incorporated as part of the sustainable design and construction practices. So it's not a case that development would meet the policy if it was providing building regulations. It's got to go further, and if it doesn't, it's going to be in conflict with policy.
No, I think the intention is very much as our approach is to climate change in general in terms of the carbon reduction, where if it's in line with building standards, then it would be considered to be in line with the policy. I think that statement also links to the sustainability statement, where it states that water management is one of the factors that should be included within the sustainability statement. So it does give that option for, should a development want to have that optional standard, it can be demonstrated through that. But I think we have sort of set out within our MIQ response as well, that linking back to the stage 1 hearings and the discussions that we've heard earlier today in terms of sewage network and management, that an optional standard of the higher level may be beneficial in terms of impacts on the network capacity across the borough.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm a little bit confused about this. So my understanding is part G of the building regulations, the national standard is 125 litres per person per day. The optional standard is 110 litres per person per day. If a local planning authority wants to move to that enhanced standard, the PPG is very clear on what you need to be able to, what you have to demonstrate as a local plan examination in order to move to that standard, and that is evidence of need, and that is whether the area lies in an area of water stress, which has already been confirmed it doesn't, whether there's any water resource management plans produced by water companies which would indicate a need to move to that 110 litre per person per day standard, which there isn't, or there's a river basin management plan, again, which would flag the need for that more stringent standard, which there isn't. So there is no evidence there that there is a requirement to move to that optional standard. I can't see any evidence in the council's evidence base that would address the PPG criteria. Furthermore, there's also a requirement to take into account the viability of doing this, and I can't see in the viability assessment that that's been taken into account either. I think the viability assessment assumes, just in line with building regulations, 125 litres per person per day. Thank you.
So can I just clarify with the council, when looking at policy 5, criterion 1, development of various kind of types, shall, where applicable, incorporate sustainable design and construction practices, including, we go through them, water efficiency that meets the highest national standard. So just being clear with the council, you are seeking 110 litres per person per day from new developments?
No, it's the 125 litres per day. That's what is the baseline. If a development proposal wanted to go further than that, then that would be supportive of that.
But is part 1 of the policy meant to be read as kind of encouraging those things rather than it shall include or incorporate those things where applicable.
I think because they say we're not in a water stressed area, the requirement to go to that high level, as I said in MPPG, is not set out. So therefore we've sort of left it flexible in terms of how that's applied.
I think my way forward on this is, I appreciate the council may want a flexible approach, but can I push it back to the council that this is an area that may need clarification in terms of what was it seeking? If the starting point is building regs, 125 litres per day, obviously it doesn't need to be a policy requirement around that. I think if it's in a case of we'll support and encourage developments that go further, I think there needs to be something clearer within that policy, if that's the intention. And then, are there anything further on the optional water standards? No. Okay, well, I'm afraid it's come to just gone 5:20. I'm at a point now where I think my ability to sensibly absorb more information and evidence is kind of reached its limit. So I'm going to draw today's discussion to its conclusion. We still have issues to discuss under this item, and I'll liaise with Annette, the programme officer. Now, I'm obviously in this building tomorrow and Tuesday and Wednesday next week. I think looking at the programme, it's probably unlikely that we'll find time tomorrow to pick up some of these issues. So I'm looking probably at Tuesday next week, or failing that, as part of Wednesday. Does anybody who's still got something to say on this matter 9 discussion know of any kind of availability or issues I need to be aware of for participation next week? Okay, well, I'll sort something through the programme officer and we'll let people know where we can kind of conclude this discussion. Thank you. Okay, I'll draw today's session to its conclusion. Thank you everybody for your contributions. We'll be reconvening back in this room at 9:30 tomorrow for a further session on Fellgate in the morning and housing land supply in the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.